All right. Hi, everyone. My presentation will be on a new measure of early relational health and its associations with sociodemographic characteristics. So, early childhood experiences promote child development, and children develop in an environment of relationships. Specifically, healthy development occurs when there is this ongoing engagement in empathic and empowering interpersonal interactions between a child and their caregivers. Early relational health then really refers to these foundational, culturally embedded, developing positive and reciprocal interactions that nurture and build emotional connections between caregivers and their infants. And these early interactions result in both child and caregiver confidence, competence, and emotional well being. Therefore, viewing development through an early relational health lens really helps recognize that critical role that relationships play in child outcomes, including physical, cognitive, neurobiological, and social emotional development. And one of the most studied aspects of early relational health is attachment. Arguably, however, early relational health actually begins before birth and continues after the child is born as this dyadic, mutually interactive process. And as infants become more mobile later in the first year, we can see evidence of the attachment relationship in how infants seek proximity to their caregivers in times of stress or threat. Therefore, attachment can be thought of as a component of early relational health. And since children's social, emotional, and interpersonal functioning develops in the context of the caregiver child relationship, it is important to look at other factors that might impact these early relational experiences as well. And two of these factors are the stress related to caregiving and the mental health of the caregiver. So, existing studies with toddlers have shown that higher levels of maternal psychopathology negatively impact the mother infant relationship as well as the infant attachment style. So, for example, maternal depression has been connected to insecure attachment behavior, and mothers with postnatal psychopathology tend to engage in less sensitive and less appropriate play and interactions with their children. Parental psychopathology is also related to parenting stress. So, compared to mothers of infants with less severe symptoms, mothers with severe anxiety and depressive symptoms tend to have significantly higher levels of parenting stress. So, as part of a transactional system, then, early parent infant relational health encompasses aspects of parental psychopathology, caregiving stress, and emerging attachment security. As the parent infant relationship develops during that first year, then parental stress and psychopathology may have long lasting effects on infant development. So, parental stress and psychopathology are important not just because they predict later child development, but also because they help characterize the caregiving environment in which the infant's social emotional functioning is developing. And we really wanted to capture this with a new measure of early relational health. So, the 28 PediaTrac items presented in this study were intentionally designed to capture multiple dimensions of early relational health, since it is a broad umbrella construct with many different components. And as such, we did expect there would be multiple factors, not necessarily one underlying factor. So the present study examined the factor structure of this new early relational health measure, its validity with existing measures, so specifically the brief symptom inventory, as well as the parenting stress index, and sociodemographic covariates. Longitudinal data were collected at 9 and 12 months of age from a larger ongoing longitudinal study of a pooled sample of term and preterm infants from newborn to 24 months, which were recruited from 3 metropolitan academic hospitals using PediaTrac, which is an online tool for tracking development. So mothers at sites 1 and 2 were more likely to be Black or African American, have lower household income, and live in neighborhoods with greater deprivation, compared to mothers from site 3 who were more likely to be white, have higher household income, and live in neighborhoods with lower area deprivation. So as demonstrated in the scree plots, at both 9 and 12 months, a 4 or 5 factor solution may best fit this data. And based on the magnitude of the factor loadings and communalities, we did identify 3 factors that had the same items at both 9 and 12 months. And these factors explained approximately 30% of the total variance on the early relational health items. So the first factor, which we labeled attachment security, includes items about proximity seeking, distress around strangers, and preference for the primary caregiver. The second factor, which we labeled caregiving stress, includes items specific to stress related to taking care of a child. And then finally, our last factor, which we called anxious depression, includes items about feelings of worry, sadness, and feelings of irritability. Before presenting the results, I'm going to show you a series of box plots illustrating the similarities across items and time on both the validity measures and the scales derived from these 3 factors. Importantly, across all measures, there were no differences between site or sampling period. So on the left are scores on the BSI anxiety scale, and on the right are BSI depression scale scores. So on the x-axis are data collection sites with scores at 9 and 12 months separately for each site. And as expected with a community sample, both anxious and depressive symptoms were low on average, though it should be noted that there were a wide range of scores, indicating some caregivers reported clinically significant symptoms of anxiety or depression. There were no differences on either anxiety or depression by site or sampling period. So these figures display total scores on the PSI, which was only collected at 12 months. And as expected again with a community sample, caregiving stress was moderate on average and similar across sites. Now turning to the new early relational health scales, these figures highlight the similarity in median attachment security across both site and sampling period. And as might be expected for a developing construct, there were noticeably more variations in attachment security at 9 months compared to 12 months. These figures display scores on the caregiving stress scale at both 9 and 12 months separately for each site. Again, as expected with a community sample, caregiving stress was low on average, and there were no differences in caregiving stress by site or sampling period. And then lastly, similar to scores on the BSI, scores on the anxious depression scale at 9 and 12 months were similar over time and across site. And again, as expected with a community sample, both anxious and depressive symptoms were low on average. So to assess the construct validity of the 3 early relational health scales, we correlated our measures with both the BSI and the PSI. And as expected, the anxiety and depression scales were significantly correlated at both sampling periods. For the anxious depression scale, we see strong correlations with both the BSI, anxiety, and depression scales at 9 months and at 12 months. And then the PSI, again, which was only administered at 12 months, was too strongly correlated. Next, we examine the correlation between all three scales of early relational health. Attachment security was not significantly related to caregiving stress at either 9 or 12 months. Caregiving stress was strongly positively correlated with anxious depression at both 9 and 12 months. And anxious depression was significantly positively correlated with attachment security at 9 months, but not 12 months. So, with this unusual association between attachment and anxious depression, we'll transition to the next slide where we partial out household income, since it was one of the major differences between data collection sites. So, after partialing household income, we see attachment security was not correlated at 9 months with caregiving stress, but was significantly negatively correlated with caregiving stress at 12 months. Caregiving stress was still strongly positively correlated with anxious depression at both 9 and 12 months. And there's still this unexpected association between anxious depression and attachment security, such that anxious depression was significantly positively correlated with attachment security at 9 months, but was significantly negatively correlated with attachment security at 12 months. It is of note that in preliminary analyses, we have found there are differences in sites between the level of psychopathology. So counterintuitively, our site with more sociodemographic resources is reporting higher levels of psychopathology. Therefore, we look to see if there were specific sociodemographic factors that were predictive of early relational health. So this table contains the standardized and unstandardized parameter estimates from a multi-level model where observations were nested within participant. And in addition to change over time, we included term status, the infant's biological sex, maternal age, household income, marital status, and area deprivation index as sociodemographic predictors. Of note, anxious depression increased while caregiving stress decreased from 9 to 12 months. Additionally, younger mothers and those with higher household income reported greater attachment security. And finally, mothers with higher incomes who were married and who lived in an area with less deprivation reported more caregiving stress. So in conclusion, our new early relational health scale showed convergent validity with established measures, including the anxiety and depression scales of the BSI, as well as with the PSI. As expected, caregiving stress was related to more caregiving psychopathology. However, surprisingly, more sociodemographic resources were actually associated with more caregiving stress, and secure attachment was associated with greater symptoms of anxiety and depression. Again, as noted, preliminary results have shown this paradoxical finding that those with more sociodemographic resources also report higher levels of psychopathology. And there are a number of possible explanations for this relationship. For example, it may be that individuals with more sociodemographic resources do have higher levels of psychopathology. However, they also have more resources to help them successfully engage in interactions with their child to promote healthy attachments. It may also be that current measures of anxiety and depression are not accurately capturing the anxiety and depressive symptoms experienced by those with less sociodemographic resources. So additional research is then needed to more fully understand how caregiving stress and psychopathology relate to early relational health in the first year. And that's it. Thank you for your time.